Hi, have you ever drove down the road and wondered to yourself, what the heck are these road workers doing? Well, my name's Alex Weiss, and as a senior in the Construction Engineering Technology program here at the University of Toledo, I hope to answer some of these questions for you today with this presentation of how to build a road. Let's move on to the next slide. Now, steps in building a road, we have four very important things to think of when we're building a road. We got to plan what we're doing, we have to design the road, we have to grade and move the dirt where we want it, and then we have to pave the road. So these are very important points, so we'll move on to these in more detail. Now, in any construction project, planning is the most important part. We got to think some common questions ourselves. We got to think, who's going to be using the road? What's it going to be used for? And then we have to think of how we're going to most economically and efficiently build the road. Because usually we're building the road for a customer who's going to be paying for it. And they don't want to pay that much money for it, I can guarantee you that. So let's move on to a little bit more planning here. Now, we got to think of constraints, because construction projects are notorious for having constraints. We got to think, are there obstructions in the way? What about the environment? We can't just go cutting through a forest to build a brand new road. Then we got to think of how can we impact the public the least. So I'm sure we've all drove down the road before and thought to ourselves, what the heck, can't they do this any better? Well, trust me, us as engineers, we try our hardest to, but sometimes it's just the lesser of two evils. So we try our hardest to impact the public the least, and that's a big part of our planning. And then lastly, we got regulations and codes. So just like building codes, we have regulations and code to adhere to. So let's move on to the next step in our process. Now we're ready to crunch some numbers. So now we're ready to design the project. Now we're designing the project, we've got to think of things such as location, soil properties, the traffic volume, drainage, and possible future development. And these are all really important, so we'll go into these in a little bit more detail. Now location, location, location. This is very important because if we're designing a road in Florida, say, versus here in Ohio, the road design is going to be two completely different animals, because here in Ohio we have to worry about the freeze-thaw cycles. Next thing we got to worry about are soil conditions. Well, a lot of people ask, well, that's just dirt, what does that matter? Well, the soil is the building blocks of our road. It's what holds the road up, and it's actually arguably one of the most important parts of our road. So the pavement rests on top of the soil, and if the soil is weak, the pavement will bend and just break. And when we're surveying sites for soils, we're looking for good soils, because if we get bad soils, we can get away with doing things such as mechanically stabilizing them, or we can just mix in concrete with the soil and actually harden it up by pouring concrete into it and mixing it. The worst case scenario is when the soil is just so crummy that we got to tear it all out and just completely replace it, and that can be very expensive. So we always hope that we never ever have to do that. Let's move on with some more design. Now drainage, this kind of goes hand in hand with the location, is very important, especially here in Ohio, because if we can't get the water up from underneath the pavement, it's just going to freeze and thaw and create potholes like what we're all probably seeing now, because we're in the first thaw of the season, so now the road has been uplifting in those areas with poor drainage. The other thing is, if you have water flowing underneath your pavement, it's washing the dirt out. And I shouldn't say dirt, we're washing soil out. And what do we say soil does? It supports our pavement. So we can't just wash that out of there, otherwise we're going to be screwed and the whole pavement's just going to collapse. Next we got to think about traffic volume. Now traffic volume, we'd have to go into more detail than I can in a 10-minute presentation, but traffic volume goes into the design equations for the pavement. So we can't go into that too much, but it's very important to study the traffic volume. A lot of this is done with historical data, so we can know how thick to design our pavement. Now next we have possible future development. This is more prevalent in the private sector when we're building, let's say, a road for a factory, and in the future they're planning on expanding. Well, we want to design the road for their future expansion, so we don't have to come back later and redesign the road and probably make it thicker, because if they're expanding, they're going to have more vehicles on the road. So I think we're ready to move on. I think we're ready to start getting into the fun stuff. We're ready to move some dirt. And as I said, earthwork and soil, that's the most important part of our project. Because we got to think, we're just laying pavement on top of the soil, and the soil is this building block, so we really want to make sure that's good. So here's the 3 steps in earthwork. We have to create a new roadway path, we have to install the drainage systems, and we have to grade and compact the soil. These are 3 very important things, so we'll go into more detail. creating a new roadway path. Now, in most projects that we think of, like ODOT repaving a highway, this isn't a big deal because they're just paving over an existing roadway. But if we need to create a path for a new road, let's say in a forest somewhere, we got to think of all the trees and grub that we're going to have to cut out of the way. And then going back to the environment, you got to think of what kind of habitat am I destroying here? Because as we progress in construction, environment is becoming almost more important than the construction job itself anymore. So creating the roadway path is a very important very important process. So let's move on with more construction. Installing drainage. Now, as I said before, drainage is the most important part, or not one. Keep saying this and that's the most important part, but drainage is a very important part. And we install drainage. We drain things one of three ways usually. We use pipes, channels, and catch basins. Now, channels. A lot of us probably drove down the road and looked to the side and saw this ditch on the side of the road and thought to ourselves, why would they put a ditch right there when I'm going to crash into it? Well, a ditch is the most economical means of moving water, because all we're doing is just digging up earth and letting the water flow through it. Now, if we had to go and design and build a pipe big enough to do that, we'd be spending a lot of money. So let's move on. Grading and soil compacting. Now, as I said before, the soil compaction and the soil process is very important. So when we're grading soil, what I mean by grading is we're leveling the soil to how we want it. We're setting it at the right elevations that we want. If we have a sharp turn, we're sloping the landscape so we can get that nice curve into these turns. And then after everything's graded, now we're ready to start compacting. When we're compacting, that's the longest process for a construction job. So like when you're driving down the road and you wonder, why hasn't this site looked like it's gone anywhere? Why hasn't it evolved and got farther in the processes? Well, that's because they're worried about compacting. And when they compact, they have very stringent compaction unit weights that they have to meet. And when you compact, you can only compact one layer at a time. So that's why it takes a long time for this compaction process, because we put a 3-inch layer down, compacted, another 3-inch layer down, compacted. Sometimes we have to go all the way up to 12, 15 inches, so you can imagine doing it 3 inches at a time. It takes some time. Let's move on. So now we're ready for the fun part. We're ready to pave our road. Now, two common paving materials that we're all familiar with probably is asphalt and concrete. Asphalt is just a mixture of a petroleum-based product and crushed rock. It's like a tar that has rock in it. Concrete is a mixture of Portland cement, water, and aggregate. Aggregate just being a fancy word for stones. Now, since we're all familiar with asphalt roads more than anything, and since this presentation can only be 10 minutes long, we're just going to focus on asphalt. Asphalt has to be heated to 300 degrees before you can lay it down. It's kind of like a plastic. When plastic is cold, you can't bend it, move it, or form it into the shape that you want. Asphalt's the same way. When asphalt is cool, go out there and touch the street right now, it's nice and hard. When you heat up to 300 degrees, it's like plastic. It becomes more malleable. So the process involves heating it, then we spread it across, and in this picture here you can see this is an asphalt spreader. And then behind them we have an asphalt roller. And similar to soil, we put asphalt down in individual layers. Generally, the first layer is about 6 inches thick, then we go to 2 inches, and then 1.5 inches. And each of those layers are slowly compacted until they meet specifications. All right, let's move on. At last, we're finally ready to drive on our road. Now, we skipped a lot of steps when it comes to really designing a road because this presentation is limited to only 10 minutes. But now, hopefully, you kind of get the gist of it. So let's go over the steps one last time. We have to plan our project because that's very important. We can't just go in there blind. We have to design the project because we need to know what pavement thickness do I need. We have to move and compact soil because, as stated before, that's our building block for our pavement. And then we get to pave our road. And then after that, we're finally ready to go for an evening drive. Now, I hope after this presentation, the next time you're going down the road, instead of sitting there cussing, thinking to yourself, why are they always doing road construction? You can think to yourself, hey, I know what they're doing. My name is Alex Weiss. Thank you for listening to my speech.